Black janitor helps poor woman, unaware she's the disguised mother of a billionaire. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. It was a cold, windy evening when James Walker, a janitor at one of the city's most luxurious office buildings, spotted her. She was standing at the entrance, shivering, her clothes ragged from the bitter chill of the night. Her eyes were downcast, her hands clutching a worn-out purse that seemed like it held the last of her meager belongings. James, used to seeing people in the building's posh lobby, never imagined that anyone could be as out of place as this woman, yet here she was. Something in her tired eyes caught his attention. Despite the harsh winds, she stood still, seemingly waiting for someone. His heart softened. He approached her slowly, unsure if he should help, yet his instincts pushed him to act. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked gently, his voice betraying the concern he felt. She looked up at him, startled at first, then offered a weary smile. "I'm just waiting," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the wind. "I was supposed to meet someone, but—" She trailed off, not finishing the sentence. James could see the desperation in her eyes, but he didn't press her for more. "It's freezing out here," James said, glancing up at the darkened sky. "You can come inside, stay warm for a bit." She hesitated, glancing at the building's massive glass doors, clearly unsure whether she should accept. After a moment, she nodded and followed him inside. James led her to the break room, offering her a seat by the small kitchen. She hesitated again, but eventually sat down. "Would you like some coffee?" "It's not much, but it'll warm you up," he offered, pouring the last of the coffee into a chipped mug. She nodded silently, wrapping her arms around herself. As they sat in silence, James couldn't help but wonder about her story. There was something familiar about her face, though he couldn't place it. She certainly didn't belong in this part of town. Her clothes and demeanor screamed of someone struggling to make ends meet. But there was also something regal about her, a certain air that suggested she had known better days. James glanced at the clock. His shift was ending soon, and he needed to get home, but something about the woman in front of him kept him rooted to the spot. After a few moments, she spoke again. I just need to get by until morning," she said, her voice low and uncertain. "I'm not asking for much, just a little time to figure things out." James, feeling a sudden surge of empathy, nodded. "Take all the time you need," he said, though he wasn't sure what that meant. "I don't know what you're going through, but you'll get through this." The woman smiled again, a faint glimmer of relief in her eyes. James didn't know it then, but the small act of kindness he had extended that evening would set off a chain of events that would change both of their lives forever. Neither of them knew it yet, but the woman sitting before him was not just a poor stranger in need of help. She was the mother of someone far more powerful than James could ever imagine. I could feel the tension growing in the room. James glanced at the clock again. His shift was almost over, but something was making him hesitate. He wanted to stay and talk to her, but he wasn't sure what to say. The woman, who had introduced herself as Naomi, sat silently, her mug of coffee warming her hands. She hadn't spoken much since he offered her the drink, but he could tell she was grateful for the small comfort. The silence wasn't awkward, but it was thick with unspoken words, as if both of them were trying to figure out what to say next. James had helped people before, but something about Naomi felt different. She wasn't like the other strangers he encountered in the building. She wasn't just looking for a quick handout. She seemed to carry a quiet strength, a weight he couldn't quite place. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "So, how did you end up out there tonight?" he asked gently, trying to break the silence without pushing too hard. Naomi looked up at him, her tired eyes meeting his, and for a brief moment, he saw something flicker in them, something hidden, something painful. "It's a long story," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I was just trying to make ends meet. Things got harder after I lost my job. My son." Her voice trailed off, and she took a deep breath, as though gathering the strength to continue. James could tell she was holding something back, but he didn't want to pry too deeply. "You don't have to tell me everything," he said quickly. "I just wanted to make sure you're okay." Naomi nodded slowly, offering him a faint smile. "I'm okay for now," she said. "But it's been hard." James could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped as she spoke. She looked like someone who had been fighting for too long, too hard, without much in return. He stepped closer, the warmth of the break room making him feel more comfortable as he tried to find the right words. "If you ever need help," he said, his voice low, "I'm here. You don't have to go through this alone." Naomi's gaze softened as she looked at him, and for the first time that night, she seemed to relax just a little. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You're kind." He shook his head, feeling a little embarrassed. "It's nothing. I just can't stand seeing people suffer when they don't have to." Naomi smiled again, this time more genuinely. James didn't know what it was, but something about her smile struck him deeply. It was a smile of someone who had seen too much pain, yet still held on to hope. Naomi glanced at the door, her face turning slightly pensive. "I should go," she said, standing up slowly. "I don't want to cause any trouble." James stood up too, feeling a sudden urge to stop her. "Are you sure? It's late, and it's dangerous out there." Naomi hesitated, her hand on the door handle. "I'll be fine. Thank you for everything." As she stepped outside, James watched her for a moment, the cold night air rushing in as she disappeared into the shadows. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story than she had let on, but he respected her privacy. The next morning, when James arrived for his shift, he was startled to see Naomi again. She was sitting in the same spot by the door, but this time, she wasn't alone. A man in a suit was standing beside her, talking to her in hushed tones. James felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The man turned and walked toward the elevator, giving James a brief nod as he passed. Naomi was still sitting there, her head down, lost in thought. James decided to approach her again, his curiosity getting the best of him. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice casual but concerned. Naomi looked up at him, and for a brief moment, her expression was unreadable. "It's fine," she said softly, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes that James couldn't place. "I'm just trying to figure things out." James nodded, but he still had that feeling, that nagging sense that he didn't know the whole story. As Naomi stood up to leave, she smiled at him once more. "Thank you again," she said, "for being kind." "Anytime," James replied, his voice steady. But as she walked away, he couldn't help but wonder who the man in the suit was, and why Naomi had been so hesitant to share her story. The pieces didn't quite fit together, but he knew one thing for sure. Naomi was no ordinary woman. And somewhere in that tangled web of mystery, James had a feeling he would uncover something he never expected. As the days passed, James continued with his usual routine. He saw Naomi a few more times in the break room, each time with a bit more of a strained look on her face, as if she were holding back something. But there was no sign of the man in the suit again. It seemed like Naomi was trying to keep her distance from anyone who might question her, but James couldn't shake the feeling that he had only seen the surface of her story. One afternoon, as James was preparing to mop the hallway outside the building, he was interrupted by the familiar sound of Naomi's voice. "James, can I talk to you for a moment?" she asked, her tone soft, almost hesitant. James looked up from his work, surprised. She had never approached him like this before. "Of course, Naomi. Is everything okay?" he said, his mop aside, walking towards her. She was standing near the elevator, her arms crossed tightly against her chest. Her usual calm demeanor seemed to be cracking just a little. "I need to ask a favor," she said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "I don't have anywhere to stay tonight. Could I stay here, just for the night? I'll be gone first thing in the morning." James felt a rush of concern flood through him. Naomi had never mentioned anything about her living situation in detail, but now it seemed more pressing than ever. He nodded quickly, not wanting to leave her in the cold, unsure of where she would go next. "You're welcome to stay," he said, a bit more firmly than he intended. "Let me show you to the break room. You can rest there for a while." Naomi seemed relieved, but there was a sadness in her eyes that James couldn't ignore. "Thank you," she said quietly, following him as they walked toward the small, quiet break room that James often used when he needed a few moments of peace. The door clicked shut behind them as they entered the room. Naomi sat down on the small couch in the corner, her shoulders slumped. "I don't want to be a burden to you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't know where else to go." I'm just, I'm trying to figure out how to fix everything. James took a seat opposite her, watching her closely. She seemed so strong, so composed, but right now, he saw the cracks. He could see that something had broken inside of her, but she was too proud to admit it. You're not a burden, Naomi, he reassured her, his voice steady. We all go through tough times, but you don't have to do it alone. Naomi gave him a small, grateful smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. The room fell into a heavy silence, and James could feel the weight of her unspoken words hanging in the air. After a long moment, she stood up, her voice soft. I appreciate it really, but I have to go. There's something I need to do tonight. James watched her, feeling a sense of unease settle in. She seemed so determined, but it didn't make sense to him. Where could she be going at this hour? Naomi, are you sure everything's okay? He asked, standing as well. She hesitated, then nodded. I just need to take care of some things. I'll be fine. James could tell she was hiding something, but he didn't push her any further. He wasn't sure what it was, but he felt like he was on the edge of something much bigger than he had initially thought. He didn't understand it yet, but he had a feeling that Naomi's presence in his life wasn't just by chance. All right, James said, his voice softening. But if you ever need help, you know where to find me. Naomi gave him a small, grateful smile again before walking toward the door. Thank you, James. I'll be all right. I promise. She stepped out of the room, leaving James alone in the dim light of the break room. He stood there for a moment, watching the door close behind her, a sense of uncertainty gnawing at him. He couldn't help but wonder what was really going on in her life, and whether he was only seeing a small part of the picture. As he returned to his work, the nagging feeling wouldn't leave him. There was more to Naomi than she was letting on, and James was starting to suspect that he was only beginning to scratch the surface of her story. Little did he know, the truth was closer to him than he realized. Naomi wasn't just any woman in need of help. She was someone who had been hiding in plain sight all along. And soon, James would uncover the one secret that would change everything. I woke up the next morning, ready to continue with my shift, but something felt different. The moment I stepped into the building, I felt that same unease I'd been carrying ever since Naomi walked into my life. Her words from the night before echoed in my mind. She had said she was fine, that she had things to take care of, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was running from something. As I walked down the hallway to get started with my duties, I saw her again. Naomi was standing by the elevator, her expression tense. She was wearing the same worn-out jacket she had worn the night before. There was something about the way she stood, so still, as if she were waiting for something. As I approached her, I noticed her gaze flickering nervously toward the door to the parking garage. It was as if she was waiting for someone, or perhaps avoiding someone. I wasn't sure. Naomi, I called out, a bit hesitantly. She turned her head toward me, her face softening, but the tension didn't leave her eyes. Hey, James, she said, her voice a little too casual. How are you today? I'm good, I replied, but I could tell she wasn't, and I didn't believe her. Are you okay? You look like you're waiting for someone. She looked away for a moment, avoiding my gaze. There was a pause before she spoke. I'm fine. Just thinking, she said, though her voice didn't sound convincing. I could feel the weight of her words, the hesitation in them. It was like she wanted to say something, but was afraid to. I couldn't leave it at that. Something was off. Naomi, you know you can talk to me, right? I said gently. I'm here if you need someone to listen. She finally met my eyes, and for a second, I saw vulnerability, something raw, something real. But just as quickly, it was gone. She took a deep breath and smiled weakly. Thank you, James. But there's nothing to worry about. I'm just trying to figure some things out. I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't getting the full picture. She was hiding something that was eating at her. Before I could say anything more, the elevator dinged, and Naomi stepped back. I have to go, she said abruptly. I'll see you around. She walked toward the elevator, and I stood there, watching her go. As the doors closed, I felt a sense of dread settle in my chest. Naomi was not just another person I helped. There was more to her story, something I had yet to uncover. Later that afternoon, as I was mopping the floor in the lobby, I saw the same man in the suit again. The one who had been with Naomi a few days ago. He was standing near the front door, speaking to someone on his phone. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see the serious look on his face. His eyes scanned the room as if looking for someone, and then they landed on me. There was something in his gaze that made me uneasy. He didn't approach me, but I could tell he knew exactly who I was. After a few moments, he finished his call and walked out of the building. I stood there, still holding the mop, watching him leave. My heart was racing. Naomi had clearly been involved with this man. But who was he? And why was she so intent on keeping their relationship a secret? I couldn't ignore it any longer. There was something bigger happening here, and I was right in the middle of it. I had to find out what it was. The next morning, Naomi didn't show up for her usual spot by the elevator. I figured she was just taking the day off, but something didn't feel right. I walked by the break room and stopped dead in my tracks. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear voices. Naomi's voice. She was talking to someone in a hushed tone, but I couldn't make out the words. I hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open just enough to peek inside. What I saw made my stomach drop. Naomi was sitting across from the same man in the suit, the one I had seen earlier. He was leaning forward, speaking to her in a low, serious voice. Naomi looked nervous, fidgeting with the sleeve of her jacket. She seemed to be listening intently, but she wasn't saying much. The man's expression was hard to read, but I could see the tension between them. I pulled back from the door, my heart racing. What was going on between them? And why was Naomi so secretive about it? I needed answers, but I wasn't sure how to get them. As I stood there, trying to gather my thoughts, I heard the elevator doors open. I quickly stepped back into the hallway, my mind racing. Naomi was walking toward me, but this time, her face was different. She looked worried. Her eyes darted around the lobby, and when she saw me, she gave me a tight smile. "Hey, James," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "I didn't see you earlier. Everything okay?" I nodded, trying to mask my own unease. "Yeah, everything's fine. Just working, you know." Naomi seemed to relax a little, but there was still that air of tension around her. I wanted to ask her about the man, about what was really going on, but I held back. I didn't want to push her away. "Listen," she said after a moment. "I think I need to take some time off. I've got some things to take care of." "Of course," I replied quickly. "If you need anything, just let me know." Naomi smiled weakly again. "Thanks, James. You've been really kind." And with that, she turned and walked toward the exit. This time, though, I didn't feel the same sense of relief I had before. I knew something was coming, and it wasn't going to be easy. Naomi's life was a puzzle, and I was starting to realize that I might be the one who had to piece it together. The next few days passed in a blur, with James going through the motions of his regular work, but his mind constantly drifting back to Naomi. Something was off, and he couldn't quite figure out what it was. Naomi had disappeared after their last conversation, and it made him uneasy. He hadn't seen her in the building since then, and he found himself wondering if she had left town or if she had just gone into hiding. Every time he entered the break room, he half expected her to be there, sitting quietly, looking as if she was lost in thought. But she wasn't. James felt the void where her presence used to be, and it nagged at him. His thoughts were interrupted one afternoon when, just as he was finishing his shift, he saw Naomi again. She was standing near the entrance, as if waiting for someone. James froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. Was she here to talk to him, or was she just passing through? As if reading his mind, Naomi turned around, her eyes meeting his, and she gave him a small, hesitant wave. He walked toward her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Naomi," he said softly, trying to keep his voice steady. "I've been looking for you. Where have you been?" Naomi hesitated, her expression unreadable. She seemed a little more tense than usual, and James could tell she was struggling with something. I had to take care of some things," she said, her voice almost distant. "It's been a lot." James frowned, sensing that there was more to it than she was letting on. "I get it," he said, trying to sound reassuring. "But you don't have to do this alone, you know? If you ever need help, I'm here for you." Naomi seemed to relax a little at his words, but there was still something she wasn't sharing. She looked around nervously, almost as if she were expecting someone to appear. "I know, James, and I really appreciate it," she said quietly. "But there's more to this than you realize. Things are complicated." James felt his curiosity grow, but he didn't want to push her. She clearly wasn't ready to talk, and he had to respect that. "I understand," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "But if you ever want to talk, I'm here." Naomi smiled faintly. "Thanks, James. You're one of the few good people I've met." There was a pause, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Naomi shifted, as if she were about to say something else, but she stopped herself. "I need to go," she said quickly, glancing around once more. "Take care, James." And before he could say anything else, Naomi turned and walked away. James stood there, watching her leave. The unease in his chest had returned, stronger than ever. He knew she was hiding something big. But what could it be? Later that night, as James sat at home, he found himself replaying the conversation in his mind. He thought about the way Naomi had looked at him when she said things were complicated. She had looked like she was on the verge of telling him everything, but then she had stopped. Why? What was she afraid of? He couldn't shake the feeling that Naomi wasn't just some stranger he'd helped once. There was more to her story, and now he was determined to uncover the truth. The next day, as James was wiping down the counters in the lobby, he spotted Naomi again. This time, she was standing by the elevator, staring at the floor, deep in thought. James hesitated for a moment before walking over to her. "Naomi," he called softly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up, her eyes locking onto his, and for a moment, James could see the exhaustion in her gaze. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, as if weighing something in her mind. Then, with a sigh, she spoke. I'm sorry I've been distant," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to push you away." James felt a wave of sympathy wash over him. "You don't have to apologize," he said, his voice warm. "I just want to help, if you'll let me." Naomi shook her head slightly. "It's not that simple," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's a lot you don't know, and I can't tell you everything. Not yet." James felt a pang of frustration. He wanted to understand, wanted to know what she was going through, but he didn't want to push her too hard. "I understand," he said softly. "But when you're ready, I'll be here. You don't have to keep carrying all of this by yourself." Naomi looked up at him, her eyes filled with something between gratitude and sadness. "Thank you, James," she whispered. "I don't know what I'd do without you." With that, she turned and walked toward the exit, leaving James standing there, more confused than ever. There was something so familiar about her, yet so distant at the same time. What was it she was hiding? And why did it feel like it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down? James couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was closer than he realized, and he wasn't sure whether he was ready to face it. The days that followed were filled with a sense of unease. Naomi had been distant, and every time James tried to talk to her, she gave him an excuse, a reason not to engage. He knew something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones. But what was she hiding? As he entered the building for his shift one morning, the first thing he noticed was the absence of the usual hum of conversation. The lobby was eerily quiet. His eyes scanned the room, and that's when he saw her. Naomi was sitting near the large glass window by the elevator, her head down, her hands nervously fidgeting with a small object. The way she sat, so still, so withdrawn, made James' heart tighten. He hadn't seen her like this before. Something had changed. His steps were slow as he walked towards her. "Naomi," he called gently, not wanting to startle her. She looked up, her eyes tired, as if she hadn't slept well. She offered him a small, forced smile. "Hey, James," she said quietly, but there was no warmth in her voice. It sounded flat, distant. James couldn't ignore it any longer. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice full of concern. She hesitated, looking down at her hands again. For a moment, it seemed like she was going to say something, but then she stopped herself. "I'm fine," she replied, though her voice didn't sound convincing. "I just need some time." James sat down beside her, careful not to invade her space too much, but enough to let her know he was there for her. "Naomi," he began, his voice soft. "I know you're going through something, and I want to help. But I can't do that if you don't let me in." She sighed deeply, her shoulders slumping. "I don't know how to explain it, James," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "There's just so much I haven't told you." James reached out, placing a hand on hers, trying to offer some comfort. "You don't have to explain everything all at once," he said gently. "But whatever it is, you don't have to carry it by yourself. You've got someone who cares." She looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. It was clear she was on the verge of breaking down, but something held her back. "I'm afraid, James," she whispered. "I'm afraid of what will happen if I tell you the truth." James squeezed her hand reassuringly. "You don't have to be afraid," he said. "Whatever it is, we can face it together." Naomi's lips trembled, and for a moment, James thought she might start crying. But instead, she stood up quickly, pulling her hand away from his. "I can't do this right now," she said, her voice shaky. "I'm sorry." Before James could respond, she turned and walked toward the door, leaving him sitting there, alone with his thoughts. He wanted to chase after her, to force her to open up, but he knew that wouldn't help. She had to be ready to talk, and he couldn't rush her. As the days passed, Naomi continued to keep her distance, and James couldn't help but feel frustrated. He had tried everything. He had offered help. He had shown compassion, but nothing seemed to break through her walls. It wasn't until the following week, when he was cleaning the lobby once more, that something unexpected happened. Naomi returned to the building, but this time, she wasn't alone. She was accompanied by the same man in the suit, the one James had seen several times before. Naomi looked different now. There was a hardness to her expression, a tension in her posture that hadn't been there before. James watched from a distance as she and the man spoke quietly, their voices low and intense. Naomi's eyes flickered nervously as she glanced around the room, and the man seemed to be giving her instructions. James couldn't hear their words, but he didn't need to. The man was clearly important to Naomi, maybe even more than she had let on. He felt a pang of jealousy, but more than that, he felt an overwhelming sense of worry. Who was this man, and why had Naomi been keeping him a secret? As they walked toward the elevator, James felt an urge to follow them, to confront her, but he knew he couldn't do that. Not yet. He had to find out what was going on, but this time, he had to do it the right way. He couldn't force Naomi to tell him everything. She had to come to him when she was ready. For the rest of the day, James couldn't stop thinking about Naomi and the man in the suit. He felt like he was on the edge of something big, but he wasn't sure what it was yet. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered, but he knew he had to keep looking. And soon, he would have the answers he was searching for. That night, after his shift ended, James walked to his car, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the image of Naomi and the man. Something told him that her past was more complicated than she had let on, and that the truth about who she really was, about what she was running from, was about to be revealed. He wasn't sure how or when it would happen, but James knew one thing for certain. Whatever secrets Naomi had been keeping, he was going to find out. And when he did, it would change everything. Days passed, and the more James thought about Naomi, the more he felt like something was off. The man in the suit, the one Naomi had been seen with, kept lingering in his thoughts. Who was he, and why was Naomi so secretive about their connection? James couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the verge of something important, something that would change everything. It wasn't long before the mystery surrounding Naomi started to unravel. One afternoon, as James was mopping the floors near the entrance, he saw something that made his heart stop. Naomi was walking toward the building, but this time, her face was different. There was a look of resolve in her eyes, as if she had made a decision. And there, right beside her, was the man in the suit. James immediately felt the tension rising. He was no longer an outsider to Naomi's life. He was part of it now, whether she liked it or not. As they approached, Naomi's eyes locked with his, and for the first time in days, she didn't look away. Instead, she took a deep breath and walked over to him, the man following a few steps behind her. "James," Naomi said, her voice steady, though there was a faint tremor beneath it. This is Robert. She hesitated, as though trying to find the right words. Robert, the man in the suit, extended his hand to James. "Robert Blackwell," he said, his voice firm and businesslike. James took the handshake, his mind racing. Robert Blackwell. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. There was something about the way Robert looked at him that made James uneasy. "It's good to finally meet you, James," Robert said, his tone polite but distant. "Naomi has told me a lot about you." Naomi shifted uncomfortably, her hands clasped in front of her. James could tell she was on edge, but he didn't know why. "I'm sure," James replied, trying to keep his tone neutral. He looked back at Naomi. "So, what's going on? You've been avoiding me, Naomi. I don't know what's happening, but it's clear there's more to the story. If you're ready to talk, I'm here." Naomi's eyes darted nervously between James and Robert. It was clear she wasn't ready to share everything yet, but something inside her seemed to snap. She sighed and stepped back slightly, her voice low. "James, Robert is," she paused again, this time looking directly at Robert, as if waiting for his permission to continue. Robert's expression remained unreadable. Robert is my brother, Naomi finally said, her voice soft but firm. James blinked in surprise. Your brother? He repeated, trying to process the words. Naomi nodded, her expression still distant. Yes, Robert is the one who took care of me when everything fell apart. He's been helping me, but there's a lot I haven't told you. A lot I haven't been able to explain. The words hung in the air between them. James was shocked, but more than that, he was confused. How could Naomi, the woman he had come to care about, have kept this from him? He felt the need to understand, to know everything. What happened, Naomi? He asked, his voice gentle but insistent. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, her face tight with emotion. When she opened them again, she looked straight at James, as though finally letting go of all the fear she had been holding on to. I was part of a family that was torn apart. My father lost everything, and we were forced to leave. Robert was the only one who could keep us safe, but I couldn't stay with him. I couldn't let him control my life. So I left. James listened intently, his heart aching for her. He couldn't imagine the pain she had gone through, the choices she had been forced to make. But why not tell me the truth? He asked, his voice soft. Why keep all of this a secret? Naomi looked down at the ground, her hands shaking. I was afraid, she admitted. Afraid of what would happen if anyone knew. I didn't want anyone to see me as weak. I didn't want to be pitted. I thought if I just kept my distance, I could handle it on my own. Robert, who had been standing silently beside them, finally spoke up. Naomi's always been stubborn like that, he said, his tone surprisingly warm. She doesn't like asking for help. She doesn't like anyone seeing her struggle. James turned to Robert, finally seeing the connection between the two. They shared the same intense eyes, the same quiet strength. But you've been helping her, James said, his voice still confused. Why did you come here today? What do you want from her? Robert sighed deeply, his gaze steady. I'm here to help Naomi, but I'm also here to protect her. There are people who want to use her, James. People who don't have her best interests at heart. I need her to be safe, and I can't do that alone. She needs to come back with me, where it's safe. James was taken aback. Back with you, he repeated. Naomi was looking at the ground again, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. Robert's words were calm, but there was an edge to them that made James uneasy. I'm not saying you're a threat, James, Robert said, his eyes narrowing slightly. But Naomi needs to be away from all this, away from whatever mess she's gotten herself into. Naomi finally looked up, her voice trembling. I don't want to go back, Robert. I don't want to be under your control anymore. The words were a quiet defiance, but they were enough to shift the balance of power in the room. James could see Naomi's pain, her fear of losing herself in a world that didn't understand her. Naomi, he said gently, stepping forward. You don't have to go anywhere you don't want to go. You've already made it this far on your own. You can keep going. I'll help you. Naomi's eyes filled with emotion, and for a brief moment, it felt like the weight of her world had shifted. But Robert's presence was too much, and the tension in the room was unbearable. She looked back at him, then at James. I don't know what to do, she whispered. And in that moment, James knew he had to make a choice. He couldn't let Naomi go back into the shadows. Not without a fight. The room was heavy with tension, each word exchanged between Naomi, Robert, and James seeming to add more weight to the situation. Naomi, standing just a few feet away, looked torn between the man she once trusted and the stranger who had offered her a glimpse of a life beyond the shadows. Robert stood his ground, but his eyes were colder now, sharper, as if he was preparing to make his move. James could feel the cold draft through the cracked window, but the air in the room felt suffocating, thick with unspoken truths. Naomi shifted uncomfortably, and for the first time, James saw her break. The mask she had worn for so long, the one that kept her distant, started to slip. I can't go back with you, Robert, Naomi said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. I can't be your puppet anymore. I'm not that girl. Robert's face hardened, his jaw clenching. You think you can just walk away from everything? From me? From the life I've been trying to give you? Naomi's eyes flashed, a fire igniting behind them. You never gave me a life, Robert. You controlled me, kept me locked away in a cage of your making. You don't get to tell me what's best for me anymore. James watched, his heart aching for Naomi. He saw the raw truth in her words, the courage it took to say them. Robert's eyes darted between the two of them. Then, with a frustrated growl, he turned away. You'll regret this, Naomi. You'll come crawling back when it all falls apart. He stormed toward the door, but before he left, he turned to James. Stay out of this. You have no idea what you're dealing with. And just like that, he was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. Naomi sank into a chair, her shoulders slumping in exhaustion. James hesitated, unsure of what to say or do, but his instinct pushed him forward. He knelt down beside her, gently placing a hand on her arm. Are you okay? He asked softly. Naomi didn't answer at first, but the tears that had been building up began to spill over. She wiped them away quickly, but it didn't help. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I didn't want you to see me like this. James shook his head. Naomi, you don't have to apologize. You're stronger than you know. I'm just glad you're okay. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and pain. I don't know what to do now, James. Everything feels like it's falling apart. He took a deep breath, trying to think of something comforting to say, but all he could offer was his presence. You don't have to figure it out alone, he said simply. We'll take it one step at a time. Naomi looked at him, a small, tentative smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Thank you, James, she whispered. I don't deserve your kindness, but I'm grateful for it. James sat beside her, his heart swelling with empathy. He had seen the darkness in Naomi's eyes, the weight of her past, but in this moment, he saw something different, hope. Slowly, carefully, Naomi wiped away the last of her tears and stood up. I need to go, she said, her voice firmer now, but still shaky. I need to start fresh, to find a way out of this mess. James stood with her, offering his hand. I'll help however I can, he said, his voice steady. Naomi hesitated, then took his hand. For the first time in a long while, she seemed to draw strength from it. I don't know what the future holds, but I want to try, she said softly. I want to find a place where I can finally be free. James nodded, a sense of resolve settling in his chest. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew that whatever happened, he would be there for Naomi. They walked out of the building together, the night air cool against their skin. Naomi, once so trapped by her past, was now taking the first steps toward a new beginning. And for the first time, James felt like they were both walking toward a future they could face together. The following days brought a strange calm to Naomi and James' lives. After the confrontation with Robert, Naomi seemed to find a quiet resolve, though the fear still lingered in her eyes. They both knew that nothing would be the same from here on out. Naomi had left the world she once knew behind, and though she still felt the weight of the past pressing down on her, she was determined to move forward. She started small, taking up a job at a local cafe. It wasn't much, but it was a start. James would often drop by during his lunch breaks, sitting at the counter, chatting with Naomi about nothing in particular. It was their small routine, a moment of peace amidst the storm of uncertainty that still loomed over her. She wasn't ready to face her past yet, but she was building something new, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of hope. However, Naomi couldn't escape the haunting feeling that Robert would return. She had seen the darkness in his eyes, the way he had tried to manipulate her life. She knew he wouldn't let go so easily. And one morning, as she was walking to work, that fear became a reality. She saw him standing outside the cafe, his face unreadable, his posture rigid. Naomi's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, she froze. Robert's presence was like a weight she couldn't shake. He was here, and she had no idea what he wanted. James had been waiting inside, unaware of what was unfolding outside. Naomi's hands trembled as she approached the door, her eyes never leaving Robert. She could feel his gaze on her, cold and calculating. But when she stepped inside, he didn't follow. Naomi let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She knew this wasn't over. As she entered the cafe, James looked up from his seat and smiled. Hey, Naomi. Everything okay? But Naomi couldn't hide the panic in her eyes. She had seen the way Robert had been watching her. I need to talk to you, she said, her voice low and urgent. James stood up, his concern growing. What's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost. Naomi swallowed hard, trying to steady her breath. Robert's here. He's waiting outside. James' face hardened. He stood tall, his jaw clenched. What does he want? Naomi shook her head. I don't know, but he's not here to just talk. He never is. James reached out, placing a hand gently on her arm. You're not alone in this, Naomi. I'm not going to let him intimidate you. Naomi looked at him, the weight of her past and present swirling in her gaze. She had spent so long running, hiding, afraid of the consequences of facing the people who had hurt her. But now, with James beside her, she didn't have to face this alone. She didn't know what Robert would do or what he would say, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going to let him take control of her life again. We need to go, Naomi said suddenly, her voice firm. We need to leave now. James didn't hesitate. He grabbed his jacket, and together, they walked toward the back exit of the cafe. They didn't look back, didn't waste a second. They knew they had to act fast. As they stepped into the alley behind the cafe, Naomi's mind raced. She had lived in fear of Robert for too long, but now she was ready to face him. She wasn't the same person she had been when she left him all those months ago. She had changed, and she had James by her side. Naomi looked at James, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. We need to make sure he can't find me again. I can't keep running. James nodded. We'll figure this out, Naomi. Together. The sound of footsteps behind them made Naomi freeze. She didn't need to look back to know that Robert was following them. She could hear his heavy footsteps getting closer, the weight of his presence suffocating the air around her. Naomi, Robert called out, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Naomi's heart raced, but she didn't turn around. She quickened her pace, pulling James along with her. Robert's footsteps grew louder, closer, but they didn't stop. Naomi felt the panic rising in her chest, but she focused on the sound of her own footsteps, on the feeling of James' hand gripping hers. She wasn't going to let him catch her. They reached the end of the alley, and Naomi's breath hitched when she saw the street ahead. It felt like a lifeline, a way out. But Robert was right behind them now. Naomi, stop, he shouted. You can't run forever. Naomi glanced at James, her eyes pleading. Keep going, she whispered. Don't stop. James didn't hesitate. He tugged Naomi forward, his determination matching hers. They crossed the street quickly, weaving through the bustling city. Naomi kept her eyes ahead, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't look back, not now. She had to keep moving. As they turned a corner, Naomi felt the fear beginning to lift. They had gotten away. For now, at least. But she knew this wasn't the end. Robert would come after her. But Naomi wasn't afraid anymore. She had a future now, and she wasn't going to let anyone, no matter who they were, take it away from her. The truth was out there, waiting to be revealed. And Naomi was ready to face it head on. With James beside her, she knew she was no longer alone. They moved quickly, their feet pounding the pavement as Naomi and James disappeared into the evening shadows. They didn't stop until they reached the safety of a small, inconspicuous apartment complex in the quieter part of the city. The building wasn't much, an old brick structure, faded paint, and a faint smell of must in the air. But to Naomi, it felt like a sanctuary, a place where she could breathe without the constant threat of Robert looming over her. Inside, Naomi let out a long sigh, collapsing onto the couch as James locked the door behind them. They were safe, for now. But Naomi knew it wouldn't be long before Robert tried to track her down again. I can't keep running forever, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. James looked at her, sitting down beside her. You don't have to run anymore, he replied. You're not alone. Naomi looked at him, her eyes filled with both gratitude and pain. You don't know what he's capable of, she said, her voice trembling. Robert's not just some guy. He's part of something bigger. I've seen things, done things, and I don't know how to fix it. James felt the weight of her words, but he wasn't about to let her spiral into fear. Whatever he's part of, it's in the past now, James said firmly. You're not that person anymore. You're stronger than you think. Naomi looked away, her eyes clouded with doubt. It's not that simple, she whispered. I'm not just running from him. I'm running from everything. I don't even know who I am anymore. James reached over and placed his hand on hers, offering her a comforting squeeze. You know who you are, Naomi, he said gently. You're someone who survived. You're someone who's fighting for something better. And that's who I see. Naomi's breath hitched as she looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if looking for some kind of reassurance. She didn't find it in the world outside. But maybe, just maybe, she could find it here, with James. I don't know what to do next, she confessed, her voice raw with emotion. James took a deep breath, thinking carefully. We take it one step at a time, he said slowly. We figure this out together. You don't have to do it alone. Naomi nodded, the weight in her chest easing just a little. For the first time in a long while, she felt like maybe she wasn't completely lost. Maybe there was a way forward. I can't go back to the way things were, Naomi said after a long pause. I know that now. I need to find a place for myself, a place where I can finally be free. James nodded in understanding. And you will. You've already made it this far. You just have to trust that the next step will be there when you're ready to take it. Naomi leaned back against the couch, closing her eyes for a moment. I don't even know where to begin, she said softly. But I know I can't keep hiding forever. You don't have to hide anymore, James said firmly. You're safe here. This is your fresh start, Naomi. You can rebuild. And I'll be here every step of the way. Naomi felt a surge of emotion, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. She had spent so many years buried under a mountain of fear and regret, but now, with James by her side, she could finally see a way out. She wasn't alone. She wasn't invisible. Thank you, James, she said quietly, her voice trembling. I don't know what I would do without you. James smiled, his expression warm and reassuring. You don't have to worry about that, he said gently. You'll never be alone. The next morning, Naomi awoke with a sense of clarity she hadn't had in years. It was as if a fog had lifted, and she could finally see the road ahead. She wasn't sure what that road looked like yet, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to walk it. James had given her the courage to believe in herself again. As she stood up from the couch, stretching, she looked around the small apartment. It wasn't much, but it was hers. It was a place where she could rebuild, start fresh, and finally begin to heal. She wasn't sure how long she could stay here, but it didn't matter right now. What mattered was that she had a choice. She could choose the next chapter of her life, and it was up to her to make it a good one. The doorbell rang suddenly, pulling Naomi from her thoughts. She froze for a second, her heart racing. Who could it be? James had gone to grab breakfast, so it wasn't him. Cautiously, she walked over to the door and peeked through the peephole. Her stomach dropped. It was Robert. She could see his shadow looming outside, waiting. Naomi's mind raced. She couldn't go through this again. Not now. But she wasn't the scared woman she used to be. She was stronger, braver, and she wouldn't let him control her any longer. With a deep breath, she opened the door. Robert stood there, his face cold, his eyes filled with frustration. Naomi, he said, his voice low. You need to come back. I'm not asking anymore. Naomi met his gaze, her voice steady. No, Robert. I'm not going back. Not to you. Not to that life. I'm done. Robert's face twisted with anger, but Naomi stood her ground. This was her moment. She wasn't going to let him intimidate her. She was free, and she wasn't giving that up. You can't just walk away from everything, Robert growled. You'll regret this. Naomi shook her head, her voice firm. No, Robert. I won't regret it. I'm choosing my own path now. With that, she closed the door, and for the first time in years, she felt the weight of the world lift off her shoulders. Robert wasn't her future. She was. Naomi turned around, a smile finally breaking through the walls she had built around herself. She was ready to live her life on her own terms. The first step had been the hardest, but now that she had made it, she knew nothing would stop her. The days after Naomi's confrontation with Robert were a blur of emotions. She had taken the first step toward reclaiming her life, but there was still the heavy burden of the past weighing on her shoulders. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Robert's angry face, heard his voice echoing in her head, warning her that she couldn't escape. But now, in the quiet of the apartment she shared with James, Naomi was beginning to feel something she hadn't felt in years: peace. The apartment was small, but it was hers. No longer was she running. She was standing still, and for the first time in a long time, she was making the choices that would define her future. The phone rang one afternoon while Naomi was reading a book, the soft hum of the city outside filling the background. She didn't recognize the number, but something told her to pick it up. Hello. Naomi's voice was steady, but her pulse quickened as she waited for the person on the other end to speak. There was a brief pause before a voice she didn't expect came through the line. Naomi. The voice said, cold and calculating. It's Robert. Naomi's heart sank. She had hoped that she could move on, that she wouldn't have to deal with him anymore. But here he was, reaching out again. What do you want? Naomi's voice was firm, but inside, her anxiety was rising. I want you to listen carefully, Robert continued, his voice dripping with menace. You can't keep running forever. I have connections, Naomi. People who will make sure you come back to me. This is your last chance. Naomi clenched her fists, her breath steady but her mind racing. She knew what he was trying to do. He was trying to manipulate her, trying to make her fear him. I'm done, Robert. You don't control me anymore. I'm not going back, Naomi said, her voice unwavering. If you think you can just walk away from this, you're wrong, Robert replied, his tone sharp. You owe me, Naomi. You'll regret this. You'll come crawling back when you realize you're alone. Naomi's grip tightened on the phone, but she refused to let the fear he was trying to instill take root. I'm not coming back. I've found my own way, she said firmly. And I don't need you anymore. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, Naomi thought he might have hung up. But then Robert's voice came through, quieter now, but still filled with menace. You'll see, Naomi. You can run, but you can't hide forever. I'll be watching. And with that, the line went dead. Naomi stood there for a moment, staring at the phone in her hand. Her heart was still racing, but she felt a sense of resolve settle inside her. Robert could threaten her all he wanted, but she wasn't going to let him control her life any longer. She had made it this far without him, and she wasn't going to let him drag her back into the past. Later that evening, when James returned home, he could see the worry in Naomi's eyes. He could tell something had happened, something had shaken her. Naomi, what's wrong? He asked, his voice full of concern as he walked over to her. Naomi looked up at him, her expression guarded. It was Robert, she said, her voice steady but laced with anger. He called. He's threatening me again. James didn't hesitate. He moved closer, his presence offering comfort. What did he say? He asked, his voice low. Naomi recounted the conversation. The words Robert had used to try and control her, to make her fear him. When she finished, James was silent for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. He can't keep doing this to you, James said, his voice firm. He can't keep threatening you, Naomi. You don't have to face this alone. Naomi felt a wave of relief wash over her at his words. She had been so afraid, so isolated, but James' support reminded her that she didn't have to go through this fight by herself. I know, she said softly. I don't know what he's capable of. What if he comes after me again? James took her hand, his grip strong and reassuring. We'll face it together. Whatever happens, Naomi, I'm not going anywhere. Naomi looked at him, her eyes softening. Thank you, James, she whispered. I don't know what I'd do without you. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the conversation lingering between them. Naomi's thoughts were scattered, but she felt a sense of clarity. She wasn't going to let Robert win. She wasn't going to let him control her anymore. The next morning, after a long night of rest, Naomi woke up with a new sense of purpose. She was done hiding, done being afraid. She had made it this far, and she was stronger than she had ever been. She wasn't going to let Robert's threats take away her peace. She had a new life to build, and she was determined to protect it. The phone call from Robert might have shaken her, but it also made her realize how far she had come. She had found her own way, and now, with James by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was no longer afraid of the fight. Naomi wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, and for the first time in years, she felt like she was finally in control of her own future. Days turned into weeks, and life in the small apartment Naomi shared with James began to settle into a strange but comfortable routine. Naomi, while still haunted by the past, had started to rebuild her life, piece by piece. She had found a steady job at a local bookstore, where the hours were long but the work was peaceful. She didn't have to face the chaos of her former life anymore, and that felt like a victory. Still, there were moments when her mind would wander back to Robert and the shadow he cast over her. The man had made it clear that he wasn't going to give up. Naomi knew that the time would come when he would push again, but for now, she was focused on the present, on the life she was creating with James. James, for his part, had been a constant source of support. He was always there when she needed him, whether it was to talk through the lingering fears or simply to sit quietly together. They spent more time in the apartment, cooking meals together, watching movies, and even going on walks through the park. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. It was a life she hadn't dared to hope for when she was still trapped in Robert's world. One afternoon, Naomi was sorting through some old boxes she had found in the closet. They were full of her old belongings, things she had packed away when she left her family behind. As she flipped through the items, memories flooded her, good ones and bad ones. There were photos of a time when life felt normal, before everything fell apart. But it wasn't the photos that caught her attention. It was a letter. She hadn't seen it in years. It was from her mother, written in neat, looping handwriting that Naomi remembered fondly. She opened it carefully, unfolding the yellowed paper with a tenderness that surprised her. The letter read, "Naomi, my dear, I know you are facing a difficult path, but remember that you are stronger than you think. I hope one day you will find peace in your heart. I know you have the power to create a life of your own, a life that makes you proud. Never forget who you are and where you come from. Love, Mom." Naomi held the letter in her hands for a long time, her eyes welling up with tears. Her mother had always believed in her, even when Naomi had lost that belief in herself. The words felt like a lifeline, a reminder that she wasn't as lost as she sometimes felt. She wiped her eyes and looked up to find James standing in the doorway, his eyes full of concern. "Everything okay?" he asked softly. Naomi nodded, still holding the letter. "Yeah, I found something from my past." She walked over to him, handing him the letter. "It's from my mom. I haven't read it in years." James took the letter, his expression softening as he read the words. When he finished, he looked up at her. "She sounds like she really believed in you." Naomi smiled faintly, a mix of sadness and gratitude in her eyes. "She did. She always did, even when I didn't." James placed the letter back into her hands, gently cupping her face in his hands. "Naomi, you are stronger than you give yourself credit for. You're here, you're rebuilding, and that's something to be proud of." Naomi felt the weight of his words, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe them. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding. She was creating her own future. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." James smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You don't have to thank me. I'm just here for you. Always." That evening, after dinner, they sat on the couch together, the soft hum of the city outside providing a peaceful backdrop. Naomi leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. She was tired, but it was a good kind of tired. The kind that came from working hard to build something meaningful. She thought about everything she had gone through, the pain, the fear, and how far she had come. She had taken the hardest step by leaving Robert, by facing the unknown, and she had done it on her own. But now, she didn't have to do it alone. She had James. And for the first time in years, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could finally find happiness. As the night wore on, Naomi closed her eyes, letting herself drift off to sleep. The weight of her past was still there, lingering in the back of her mind, but it no longer had the power to control her. She had a future now, a future she could build on her own terms. And whatever came next, she was ready for it. She wasn't the scared, lost girl she had once been. She was someone new, someone stronger, someone who had learned to fight for what she wanted. And for the first time, Naomi allowed herself to believe in that strength, in the possibility of a life without fear. As she slept, a small smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. She had made it. She had survived. And no one could take that away from her. It had been 2 weeks since Naomi found the courage to step into a new life, and each day brought both challenges and small victories. She was no longer running from her past, but that didn't mean it was gone. Her phone still rang with numbers she didn't recognize, each one a reminder of the world she had left behind. But she was stronger now. She had her job at the bookstore, a small but steady source of income, and she had James, someone who had shown her kindness and patience when she had nothing else. She had never expected to feel this way again, but as she stood in the kitchen one evening, preparing dinner with James, she realized how far she had come. The apartment, though modest, felt like home. She was beginning to settle into this life she had fought so hard to create. As Naomi chopped vegetables, she glanced over at James, who was sitting at the table, scrolling through his phone. There was a sense of ease in the way they moved around each other now, something that hadn't been there before. They were learning each other's rhythms, and Naomi found herself appreciating these small, everyday moments more than she ever thought she would. "You know," James said, looking up from his phone with a grin. I think you're turning into quite the cook. Naomi raised an eyebrow, a playful smile tugging at her lips. Oh, really? Is this your way of saying I'm not messing up the meals too badly? James laughed, shaking his head. Not at all. I just didn't realize I was living with a chef. Naomi rolled her eyes, but felt her heart warm at his words. She hadn't known how much she needed this. A simple, normal life. It was something she never thought she'd have, not after everything that had happened. She was no longer living in fear, no longer hiding behind walls she'd built to protect herself. But just as she was starting to feel a sense of peace, the knock at the door shattered the calm. Naomi froze, knife in hand, her heart suddenly racing. James looked up, sensing the tension. I'll get it, he said, standing up. Naomi didn't argue, though a pit formed in her stomach. Whoever was at the door wasn't someone she was expecting. She watched from the kitchen as James opened the door. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw who it was. Robert. Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She had hoped this day would never come, but there he was, standing in the doorway with a cold expression on his face. James seemed taken aback, his posture immediately stiffening as Robert stepped inside, without waiting for an invitation. Naomi, Robert said, his voice calm but filled with a dangerous edge. We need to talk. Naomi's pulse quickened, but she remained rooted to the spot. No, Robert, she said, her voice steady. We don't need to talk. You need to leave. Robert ignored her, his eyes flickering over to James before returning to Naomi. You don't get to decide when and where we talk, Naomi. You don't just walk away from me and think everything will be fine. James took a step forward, his protective instincts kicking in. She's made it clear she doesn't want anything to do with you, he said, his voice firm. So whatever this is, it ends now. Robert turned to face James, his gaze hardening. And who are you exactly? He asked, his voice icy. James didn't flinch, standing his ground. I'm someone who's looking out for Naomi. So I'll ask you again, leave. Naomi stepped between them, her voice rising with authority. Robert, you don't control me anymore. You don't have any power over me. I'm done. Robert's face darkened, his jaw clenching. You think this is over? He said slowly, almost mocking her. You're nothing without me, Naomi. You'll see that soon enough. Naomi felt a rush of anger build in her chest, but she stood firm, not allowing his words to shake her. I'm not going back to the life you want me to live, she said, her voice full of conviction. I've made my own choices now, and I'm moving forward. You can't control me anymore. Robert stared at her for a long moment, his eyes filled with anger and something darker, before he turned on his heel and stormed out of the apartment without another word. Naomi stood still, her body tense, as the doors slammed shut behind him. The silence that followed felt deafening. She exhaled slowly, her hands trembling. James reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding her. It's over, he said quietly. Naomi nodded, though the weight of Robert's words still lingered in her mind. I don't know if I'll ever be free of him, she whispered, her voice faltering. James pulled her into a gentle embrace. You already are, he said softly. You're free, and you don't have to face him alone anymore. Naomi closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his words wash over her. She had come so far, and with James by her side, she knew she could keep going. Robert may have tried to break her, but he hadn't succeeded. She was stronger than he could ever understand. Thank you, Naomi whispered, her voice thick with emotion. For everything. James held her a little tighter, his voice low. You don't need to thank me. We're in this together. For the first time in a long time, Naomi felt the weight on her shoulders lighten. She wasn't alone. She had made it through the hardest part of her journey, and now, with James beside her, she was ready to face whatever came next. The past may have tried to define her, but she knew now that it didn't have to. She was writing her own story, and no one, not Robert or anyone else, could take that away from her. The next few days after Robert's unexpected visit felt surreal. Naomi had thought she would be paralyzed by fear, but the overwhelming sense of determination that had taken root in her only grew stronger. Every time she felt a flicker of doubt, she would remember the look in James's eyes when he told her she wasn't alone. That thought became her anchor. She didn't have to face this alone anymore. She had a future to build, and she was ready to fight for it. Naomi returned to her routine at the bookstore, though this time it felt different. There was an air of quiet strength about her, a confidence that had been absent before. She was finally taking control of her life, one day at a time. James supported her without question, always there when she needed him. They would share simple moments after work, talking about anything and everything, laughing over small things, and even just sitting in comfortable silence. Naomi had never known that a peaceful life could feel so fulfilling. But as much as she tried to embrace the calm, there were still moments when her past threatened to creep back into her life. One such moment arrived unexpectedly. It was late one evening when Naomi's phone rang. Her heart skipped when she saw the number on the screen. It was an unknown number, but the area code matched Robert's. Naomi hesitated for a moment, unsure of whether she should answer. But she had come this far. She had chosen her path, and she wasn't going to let him haunt her anymore. Taking a deep breath, she answered the phone. Naomi. Robert's voice came through, sharp and cold. You've made a mistake. Naomi's blood ran cold, but she held her ground. I'm not going back, Robert, she said, her voice steady. I've made my choice, and it doesn't include you. Robert let out a harsh laugh on the other end of the line. You think you can just walk away from everything? From me? He paused, and Naomi could almost hear him sneer. You'll see soon enough. I'll make sure of it. Naomi's stomach twisted, but she didn't let him see her fear. You can threaten me all you want, she replied, her voice firm. But it doesn't change anything. I'm not your property, Robert. I never was. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before Robert finally spoke. This isn't over, Naomi. You can't escape me. Naomi felt the anger bubbling inside her, but she kept it in check. You're wrong, Robert. I'm free, and you can't take that away from me. With that, she hung up the phone, her heart racing, but a sense of relief washing over her. She had stood up for herself. She had faced him again and refused to let him control her. James, who had been sitting across the room, watched Naomi with a knowing look in his eyes. He had heard the anger in her voice, but he also knew how much strength it had taken for her to stand firm. You did good, James said quietly, standing up and walking over to her. Naomi met his gaze and gave him a small smile. I'm tired of being afraid, she said, her voice thick with emotion. James placed a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to be anymore. Not with me by your side. Naomi nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And with each passing day, she was growing stronger. The fear that had once ruled her life no longer had the power to control her. She had taken back control, and she was determined to keep it. The next day, Naomi decided it was time to take a bigger step. She had been putting it off, but now she was ready. She walked into a small lawyer's office, the same one she had been researching for weeks. James had been the one to encourage her to take this step, to seek legal advice on her situation with Robert. Naomi was nervous, but she knew it was the right thing to do. The lawyer, a woman in her mid-40s with short dark hair and a calm demeanor, welcomed Naomi with a warm smile. Naomi, it's nice to meet you, she said, gesturing to the seat across from her. Please, have a seat. What can I do for you today? Naomi took a deep breath, sitting down. She explained everything. Her past with Robert, the control he had over her, the threats he had made, and how she was finally ready to break free. The lawyer listened intently, nodding occasionally, taking notes. When Naomi finished, the lawyer looked up from her notes, her expression thoughtful. It sounds like you've made some difficult decisions, but you're on the right path, she said. We can help you file for a restraining order if you feel that Robert is a threat. The law is on your side, Naomi. You have the right to protect yourself. Naomi felt a sense of relief at the lawyer's words, though a part of her still feared what Robert might do next. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that she couldn't live in fear anymore. She had to act, and she had to protect herself, no matter what. I'm ready to take the next step, Naomi said, her voice firm. I want to make sure he can't hurt me or anyone else again. The lawyer smiled, a reassuring look in her eyes. We'll get the process started immediately. You don't have to face this alone. Naomi left the lawyer's office later that day with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She was no longer a victim of her circumstances. She was a survivor, a fighter, and she was ready to stand up for herself in every way possible. The past was behind her now. The future was hers to shape, and no one, not Robert, not anyone, could take that away from her. Naomi sat in the small park across from her apartment, the sun casting long shadows over the benches as the day slowly faded into evening. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, a mix of relief, fear, and anticipation. The legal steps she had taken the previous week were beginning to take shape, and with each passing day, she could feel herself getting closer to the life she had longed for. But despite all the progress, there was still the lingering fear of Robert, a constant reminder of the past she had fought so hard to escape. She had filed the paperwork for the restraining order, and now it was in the hands of the courts. She had done everything she could to protect herself, but the waiting game was far from easy. Naomi's phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. She pulled it out, seeing that it was a text from James. "How are you doing? Want me to bring dinner tonight?" Naomi smiled at the message, her chest warming at the thought of him. He had been a rock throughout everything, steady and supportive, never asking for anything in return. She quickly typed out a reply. "I'm okay, just thinking a lot. And dinner sounds perfect. Thank you." She sent the message, tucking the phone back into her pocket. As she sat there, the breeze ruffling her hair, she felt a sense of calm settle over her. For the first time in months, she wasn't constantly looking over her shoulder, wondering when Robert would show up again. The restraining order was a powerful tool, but it wasn't just the legal protection that gave her peace. It was the fact that she had made the choice to take back control of her life. She was no longer letting fear rule her decisions. A voice broke through her thoughts, pulling her back to the present. "Naomi." She turned to see a woman approaching, a friendly face she recognized from the building. "Oh, hey, Kelly," Naomi said, standing up as the woman neared. Kelly smiled warmly. "How are you? I haven't seen you around much lately." Naomi hesitated for a moment before responding. "I've been taking care of some things," she said, offering a small but genuine smile. "But things are getting better." Kelly nodded, as if understanding more than Naomi had said. "I'm glad to hear that. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. We're neighbors, after all." Naomi felt a wave of gratitude toward Kelly. It had been a while since anyone had offered her that kind of support, and it meant more than she could express. "Thanks, Kelly," Naomi said softly. "I really appreciate it." As Kelly walked away, Naomi sat back down on the bench, her mind once again drifting. She hadn't realized how much she had been carrying, how much weight she had been holding on to since everything started with Robert. But now, as she sat there in the quiet park, she felt the first real sense of relief. She was free, and she was ready to start living again. When James arrived later that evening with dinner, he found her in a more relaxed state than he had seen in weeks. Naomi greeted him with a warm smile as he entered, carrying bags from their favorite takeout place. "I brought our usual," he said, setting the bags down on the kitchen counter. "I figured comfort food was in order tonight." Naomi laughed softly, her heart light. "You know me so well," she said, taking a seat at the table. They ate together, talking about everything and nothing at all, enjoying the comfort of simple, shared moments. James watched her carefully, his concern for her still evident in the way he kept glancing at her, as if checking to see how she was doing. "How are you feeling?" he asked after a while, his voice gentle. Naomi set her fork down, meeting his gaze. "I'm okay," she said, her voice steady but soft. "I'm still nervous about everything, but I feel like I'm moving forward. I don't feel as trapped as I did before." James smiled at her, his eyes full of warmth. "You're stronger than you know, Naomi. I'm proud of you." Naomi felt a wave of emotion rise in her chest. She had been through so much, and yet, here she was, starting to build something better. Something that didn't feel like it was defined by her past. "I don't think I could have done it without you," she admitted quietly, her voice thick with emotion. James reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "You didn't have to do it alone," he said softly. "I'm glad I could be here for you." Naomi squeezed his hand, her heart full of gratitude. "I know I'm not perfect," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I'm trying. I'm trying to find my way back to myself." James nodded. "And you're doing great. Every step you take is a step toward something better." Naomi smiled, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a while, she wasn't afraid to face it. She had her own life to live now, and she was finally ready to take control of it. As they finished dinner, they sat back and talked for a while longer. The apartment felt warm and safe, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Naomi wasn't looking over her shoulder, waiting for something bad to happen. She had built this life with her own hands, and now she was ready to live it, one day at a time. Whatever came next, she knew she wasn't facing it alone. The future was hers to shape, and she was no longer afraid to do it. She had made it through the storm, and now, she could finally feel the calm. Naomi woke up to the soft hum of the city outside the window, the first light of morning casting a warm glow through the curtains. The apartment felt like a safe haven now, a place that was truly hers, where she could begin to rebuild after everything that had happened. It was a quiet, peaceful morning, and for the first time in months, Naomi felt like she had the time and space to breathe, without fear constantly lurking in the background. But even as she stretched and prepared to face the day, she knew that Robert was still out there, lingering in the shadows. The restraining order had been filed, but Naomi understood all too well that legal protection was not a guarantee of safety. She had learned that the hard way. Still, she wasn't as afraid as she used to be. She had taken control of her life, and no matter what happened, she wasn't going to let him define her anymore. As she made her morning coffee, her phone buzzed on the counter. Naomi glanced at it, unsure whether she wanted to pick it up. It was an unknown number, but something in her gut told her that it was important. She took a deep breath, picked up the phone, and answered. Hello. There was a long pause on the other end, before a familiar voice spoke. Naomi, it's James. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected a call from him, especially not so early. James? Is everything okay? Naomi's voice was filled with concern. Yeah, everything's fine, he said, his voice steady. But I need to talk to you about something. It's important. Naomi felt a knot form in her stomach. The urgency in his voice wasn't like him. What's going on? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been doing some digging, James began. And I found something. It's about Robert. I don't want to freak you out, but you need to know. Naomi's pulse quickened. What did you find? James sighed, and she could hear the weight of the moment in his breath. There are some connections that go deeper than we thought. Robert's not just some angry ex. He's involved in some things that could put both of us in danger. There are people, Naomi, people who he's worked with, and they don't just let things go. Naomi's mind raced as James's words settled over her like a cold wave. The realization hit her hard. She had thought that leaving Robert behind meant leaving his world behind, but now she understood that she had only scratched the surface. What do we do? She asked, her voice steady but filled with an underlying panic. We don't let him control us, James replied firmly. We get ahead of this. I've already reached out to someone. We need to go to the authorities and let them know exactly what we're dealing with. We have to take it out of his hands. Naomi felt a wave of relief wash over her at his words. It wasn't just about her anymore. James was in this with her, and together, they would figure it out. I'm with you, Naomi said, her voice strong. What's the next step? I'll meet you in a few hours, James replied. We'll go over everything, and then we'll make a plan. We're not running anymore. We're facing this head on. Naomi hung up the phone, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. She had been prepared to face Robert, but not like this. Not with the realization that he was part of something far bigger than she had ever imagined. But James was right. She couldn't keep running, and she couldn't do this alone. They would take the fight to him, together. Later that afternoon, Naomi and James sat in the small cafe they had visited many times before. The table between them was scattered with papers, notes, police reports, everything they had gathered. James had pulled every string he could to make sure they were as prepared as possible, and now it was time to take action. This is it, James said, looking at Naomi with a determined expression. We go to the authorities, get everything on record, and make sure Robert's not just a shadow in our lives anymore. We take away his power. Naomi nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. I'm ready, she said, her voice unwavering. I've been running from him for too long. I'm done. James reached across the table, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. We'll do this together, Naomi. We're in this as a team. Naomi took a deep breath, letting the words settle in her. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid. She had the support she needed, and she was ready to take control of her future. She wasn't just running anymore. She was standing tall, ready to face whatever came next. The following day, they met with the authorities. Naomi, though nervous, felt a strange sense of empowerment as she told her story to the officers, her voice strong, and clear. She had faced her demons, and now, she was taking the power back. As they left the station, James turned to her with a small smile. "How do you feel?" he asked. Naomi took a deep breath, a smile creeping onto her face. "Like I'm finally free," she said. The road ahead was still uncertain, but Naomi knew one thing for sure. She was ready to face it. With James by her side, she had the strength to confront anything that came her way. She had taken the first step in, reclaiming her life, and now, there was no turning back. The days that followed their meeting with the authorities felt like a breath of fresh air to Naomi. She had faced her past, spoken her truth, and taken a huge step in reclaiming her life. The restraining order was in place, and although the threat of Robert still loomed, Naomi no longer felt like a prisoner of fear. The phone call stopped for a while, and she could finally focus on the life she was trying to rebuild. Every morning, she woke up with a sense of purpose, going to her job at the bookstore, making small talk with customers, and slowly learning to trust herself again. James remained by her side, a steady presence in her life, and the bond they shared deepened as they spent more time together. They had become each other's support, helping one another heal in ways neither had expected. Naomi found herself laughing more often, savoring the moments of normalcy that had once seemed so out of reach. But despite the peace that had settled into her life, Naomi knew that there were still challenges ahead. Robert was not the type of person to give up easily. Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that he was waiting for the right moment to make his move again. She had seen the way he operated, the manipulation, the control, and she knew that no matter how much she had reclaimed, she would have to keep her guard up. One afternoon, as Naomi was leaving work, she noticed a black car parked across the street from the bookstore. It was an ordinary car, nothing that would immediately raise suspicion, but something about it felt off. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as she caught sight of the man sitting in the driver's seat. He was staring directly at her, his eyes cold and calculating. Naomi froze for a moment, her heart racing. She didn't recognize the man, but the feeling of being watched was unmistakable. She quickly walked past the car, trying to keep her pace steady, but the anxiety in her chest began to build. She couldn't shake the feeling that Robert's people were still out there, watching, waiting. When she got to her apartment, she didn't feel the same sense of safety she had felt before. James had already texted her, asking if she wanted to have dinner, but Naomi couldn't bring herself to relax. She felt exposed, vulnerable. She wasn't sure if it was the man in the car or the lingering sense that her past was not truly behind her. She tried to call James, but the call went straight to voicemail. Her unease grew. As she sat on the couch, staring out the window, she heard a knock at the door. Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone, and her mind immediately went to the worst possible scenario. Cautiously, she stood up and peered through the peephole. To her relief, it was just James. She quickly opened the door, letting him in. "Hey," he said, smiling, but he immediately noticed the tension in her eyes. "What's going on? You okay?" Naomi didn't know how to explain the fear that had taken root in her. She had faced so much already, but this felt different. "I don't know," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I saw a man outside the bookstore. He was watching me." James's expression hardened. "Was it someone you recognized?" Naomi shook her head. "No, but he was sitting in a car, staring at me. And then, when I came back here, I felt like something was off. I'm not sure anymore." James stepped closer to her, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "Listen, Naomi," he said, his voice steady. "We'll figure this out. You're not alone in this. I'm here." Naomi looked at him, the weight of her fear starting to lift a little. She hadn't realized how much she needed someone to lean on, to trust. "I don't want to go back to that life, James," she whispered. "I don't want to keep living like this, always looking over my shoulder." James nodded, his expression softening. "You don't have to. We'll make sure of it." The next day, James helped Naomi contact the authorities again, making sure they were aware of the potential threat she had seen. They spoke with a detective, who assured them that they would look into the matter, though Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't being taken seriously. As she walked out of the police station with James, she couldn't help but feel discouraged. The world she was trying to escape was still lingering just out of reach. That night, as Naomi lay in bed, she couldn't stop thinking about the man in the car. What if it wasn't just a coincidence? What if Robert was really behind it? Her mind raced, and she felt a tightness in her chest. She was tired of being afraid. She had come so far, but it still felt like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. The next morning, Naomi woke up to the sound of her phone ringing. It was an unknown number again, but this time, she answered it without hesitation. Naomi, the voice on the other end said. It was a voice she didn't recognize, but the calm tone made her stomach twist. We know where you are. We know what you've been doing. Naomi's heart pounded as the words sank in. It wasn't just Robert anymore. It was the people he was connected to. She had stepped into something much bigger than she realized. And now, they were watching her. What do you want? Naomi demanded, her voice shaking but firm. We want you to understand that there's nowhere you can hide, the voice said coolly. We'll be waiting for you to make the wrong move. The line went dead, and Naomi stood there, phone in hand, her body frozen. The fear that had only started to creep in now engulfed her completely. She wasn't just being watched anymore, she was being hunted. But for the first time, Naomi didn't feel like running. She was ready to face whatever came next. With James by her side, she wasn't going to back down. She had fought too hard to get to this point, and she wasn't going to let them take her down now. The morning after the unsettling phone call, Naomi sat at the small table in their apartment, staring at the untouched cup of coffee in front of her. James was sitting across from her, his gaze fixed on the papers they had been reviewing for days, the legal steps they were taking, and the strategy they had discussed. But despite all the planning, Naomi couldn't shake the weight that had settled in her chest. The voice on the phone had been calm, calculated, like they knew exactly what buttons to push. She had hoped that when the legal measures were in place, when the restraining order was filed, that Robert's hold on her life would be over. But now, the reality was sinking in. This wasn't just about him. He had a network. People who worked for him. People who could reach her no matter where she went. The fact that she had been targeted like this, that they were now actively watching her, felt like a dangerous game she hadn't signed up for. She had always been resourceful, determined to get away, but this was different. Naomi looked up at James, who was still focused on the documents. She could see the concern in his eyes, even though he was trying to remain calm for her sake. James, Naomi said quietly, her voice a little shaky. I don't know if I'm ready for this. I thought I was doing everything right. I thought I had a plan. James immediately put down the papers and leaned forward, his expression soft but unwavering. You've come so far, Naomi, he said, his voice filled with assurance. We knew this wouldn't be easy, but you've done everything you can. You're stronger than you think. Naomi shook her head slightly, the uncertainty clouding her thoughts. But what if it's not enough? What if they're already one step ahead? I can't keep living like this, James. I don't want to be looking over my shoulder every day. James took a deep breath, reaching across the table and taking her hand in his. I understand how you feel, but you don't have to go through this alone. We're in this together. We'll keep moving forward, and we'll make sure they don't have control over you anymore. Naomi felt a little comforted by his words, but the weight of the situation was still pressing on her. She was trying to stay strong, but she could feel the anxiety eating away at her. James gave her hand a reassuring squeeze before standing up. Let's go over the next steps, he said. We're not backing down now. The two of them spent the next several hours putting together a plan. James had contacted some of his contacts at the local law enforcement agency, pushing for more immediate action. They discussed everything from getting a more secure form of protection to how they would handle the next time Robert, or anyone associated with him, made a move. Naomi listened intently, appreciating James's calm and steady approach. It helped to know that someone was taking charge, someone who wouldn't let her fall back into the darkness. By the time the sun was setting, they had a plan in place, but Naomi knew that this was only the beginning. That evening, after they had finalized their strategy, they sat down together in front of the TV, though neither of them was really paying attention to the show. The weight of the situation hung over them, but Naomi found solace in the quiet moments, in the shared space where they didn't have to talk about the fear they both felt. Naomi leaned her head on James's shoulder, taking in a deep breath. I don't know how much longer I can do this, she admitted softly. James turned his head slightly to look at her, his voice gentle. You don't have to do it alone. I'm with you, Naomi. Every step of the way. Naomi closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his words settle over her. For so long, she had believed she was fighting this battle on her own, but now she realized that James had been there all along, supporting her, protecting her in the ways that mattered most. The doorbell rang, breaking the silence between them. Naomi's heart skipped a beat, her stomach dropping. She wasn't expecting anyone, and with the situation still tense, her mind immediately went to the worst-case scenario. "I'll get it," James said quickly, standing up and walking toward the door. Naomi stayed where she was, her mind racing as she listened to the sound of footsteps approaching the door. She heard James exchange a few quiet words with whoever was on the other side, and then he returned with a look of mild confusion on his face. "Naomi," James said, his voice carrying a hint of concern, "there's someone here to see you." Naomi stood up slowly, her heart beginning to race again. "Who is it?" she asked, her voice tight. James stepped aside to reveal a man standing at the doorway, holding a briefcase. The man was tall, wearing a dark suit, and his expression was businesslike but stern. Naomi's instincts immediately kicked in. She didn't recognize him, but something about the way he carried himself felt too familiar. "I'm here to speak with Naomi," the man said, his voice low and steady. "I was sent by someone who wishes to remain anonymous." Naomi's heart pounded in her chest, and she instinctively stepped back, her protective instincts kicking in. "Who sent you?" she asked, her voice firm. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a step forward, his expression unreadable. "You're not in any danger," he said, his words cold and emotionless. "But there are things you need to know. Your past, it's not as simple as you think." Naomi froze. The weight of the words hit her like a hammer. Her past? What could he possibly mean? With her heart racing, she glanced at James, who was standing by her side, his face full of concern. She didn't know who this man was or why he was here, but the warning bells in her mind were ringing louder than ever. This wasn't over. It was far from over. "What do you want?" Naomi demanded, her voice now trembling with a mix of fear and defiance. The man took a deep breath, his gaze never leaving hers. "You'll understand soon enough," he said cryptically. "But first, we need to talk." Naomi stood frozen in the doorway, the stranger's words still hanging in the air like a thick fog. "Your past, it's not as simple as you think." She could feel her pulse quicken, her heart pounding in her chest. Who was this man? And why was he here, with this cryptic message about her past? James stepped forward, his presence a steady force beside her. He didn't trust the man, but Naomi could see the determination in his eyes. He wasn't going to let anything happen to her. "Who are you?" Naomi demanded, her voice firm but shaky. The man didn't immediately respond, his expression unreadable as he stood there, briefly eyeing both Naomi and James. The air between them was thick with tension. "I'm someone who knows things," the man finally said, his voice cold and measured. "Things about you, Naomi. About where you come from." Naomi's mind raced. What did he mean by that? She had always believed that her past was just a collection of painful memories, things she wanted to forget. But now, standing before this stranger, she realized how little she truly understood about her own life. "You've been looking over your shoulder for a reason," the man continued, his gaze shifting to James, who was standing protectively by Naomi's side. "And I'm here to make sure you know why." Naomi's stomach churned. She had spent so long trying to move on, trying to escape the shadow of her past. The idea that it was all more complicated than she had ever realized felt suffocating. "What do you know about me?" she asked, her voice a mixture of defiance and fear. The man took a step forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Let's just say I know things Robert doesn't want you to find out. Things that might change everything for you." Naomi's breath hitched at the mention of Robert. Her heart raced with a mix of anger and dread. She had left him behind, tried to erase him from her life, but it seemed like he was still trying to pull the strings. "I don't want anything to do with Robert anymore," Naomi said, her voice trembling with both fear and anger. "So whatever it is you're selling, I'm not interested." The man's lips curled into a faint smile, but there was no warmth behind it. "You might feel differently once you know the truth." James stepped forward, his protective instincts kicking in. "We're not interested in whatever this is. Naomi doesn't owe you anything, and you're not welcome here." The man raised an eyebrow, unfazed by James's words. "I'm not here to force anything. I'm here to give her a choice. But that choice is slipping away the longer she waits." Naomi felt a cold chill run down her spine. She turned to James, the unease written all over her face. "James, I don't know what this means, but I think we need to listen." James hesitated, his eyes flicking to the man and then back to Naomi. He didn't like it, but he could see the fear in her eyes. Fine, he said, stepping back but staying close to Naomi. But if you're trying to play some game, we're done. The man nodded, as if he had expected that response. I don't have time for games. I'm here to make sure you understand what you're up against. He pulled a small folder from the briefcase he was carrying and handed it to Naomi. She looked at it, hesitant, but then took it. She opened the folder slowly, her hands shaking as she scanned the papers inside. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. It was a collection of photos, documents, and articles that linked her to something she never expected. This is what Robert didn't want you to find, the man said, his voice low, almost like a warning. Naomi felt her world tilt. The documents detailed connections between her family and a network of influential individuals she had never known. There were pictures of her mother, her father, people she had never met, but who seemed to have ties to powerful organizations. Naomi's mind reeled as she tried to make sense of the papers in front of her. What does this mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man's gaze softened for the first time. It means that your family was more than just ordinary people. They were involved in things that had power, things that went beyond what you ever realized. Naomi felt the weight of his words sinking in. She had always thought of herself as someone who had been abandoned, someone left to deal with the consequences of her parents' choices. But this was something else. You're telling me my parents were involved in something dangerous? She asked, the disbelief clear in her voice. The man nodded. And you're still tied to it. Robert knows this, and he's been using that to control you, to make you think you're powerless. But you're not. Naomi felt a chill settle in her bones. So, what do you want from me? She asked, her voice trembling but determined. The man's eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, Naomi saw a flicker of something like pity in them. I want you to understand that the past you've been running from is connected to something much bigger. And if you want to truly be free, you need to face it. You need to know what Robert is hiding. Naomi closed the folder, her hands shaking as she tried to process everything. She didn't know if she was ready for this. She had already faced so much, and now it felt like she was standing on the edge of something far deeper than she had ever imagined. I don't know if I can handle this, she whispered, the weight of the information pressing down on her. James stepped closer to her, his hand gently resting on her arm. You don't have to do this alone, he said softly. I'm with you, every step of the way. Naomi nodded, taking a deep breath. The road ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain, she wasn't running anymore. She wasn't going to let the past define her. She would face it, and she would fight for her future. With James by her side, she knew she could handle whatever came next. Days turned into weeks, and Naomi found herself living in a way she had never thought possible. The past was still there, lurking in the corners of her mind, but it no longer defined her. With the support of James and the strength she had uncovered within herself, she faced each new day with a quiet confidence. The information from the mysterious man had shaken her, but she refused to let it consume her. She was not the person she had been before, timid, afraid, and controlled. She was stronger now. She knew the truth of her family's past, and while it was far from easy to accept, it no longer held the same power over her. Robert, the threat that had once seemed so looming and insurmountable, was no longer a source of fear. Naomi had taken the legal steps to protect herself, and she wasn't about to let him, or anyone else, hold her back. She had rebuilt her life, and now it was hers to shape. Her days at the bookstore had become something of a sanctuary. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. It was something she had built on her own, with her own two hands. James continued to be a constant presence in her life, and their bond had only grown stronger. He was her confidant, her partner in this journey, and with him by her side, Naomi felt like she could face whatever came next. One afternoon, as she was shelving books in the back of the store, she noticed a familiar face in the aisle. She looked up and saw Kelly, the neighbor who had offered her support when Naomi first moved into the apartment. Kelly smiled warmly, her eyes lighting up when she saw Naomi. Naomi, she greeted, walking over. I didn't know you worked here. This place is great. Naomi returned the smile, feeling a sense of warmth spread through her. Yeah, it's been a good fit, Naomi said, trying to sound casual. Kelly nodded, glancing around the bookstore. I'm glad to see you doing well. I've been meaning to ask you. I'm putting together a little get-together this weekend. A few people from the building and some other friends. You should come. It'll be fun. Naomi hesitated for a moment. She wasn't used to socializing much, not after everything she had been through, but she didn't want to isolate herself either. The thought of spending time with others, especially people who had shown her kindness, felt strangely comforting. I'd like that, Naomi said, her voice soft but sincere. I could use a change of pace. Kelly smiled, clearly pleased. Great. It's on Saturday at my place. I'll send you the details. Naomi nodded, feeling a small spark of excitement. It had been a long time since she had let herself experience something like that, and for once, she was looking forward to it. The weekend came faster than Naomi had expected. She had spent the days leading up to it with a mix of nervous anticipation and excitement. She didn't know what to expect, but she was ready to take that step. On Saturday, she found herself standing outside Kelly's apartment building, her heart pounding a little faster than usual. She had picked out a simple dress that made her feel good, nothing too fancy, but enough to remind her that she had come a long way. When she entered the apartment, she was greeted by the warm, inviting atmosphere of a small gathering. Kelly was already there, chatting with a few people, and Naomi could feel herself easing into the environment. It wasn't long before she found herself engaged in conversation, laughing and talking with people who genuinely seemed interested in getting to know her. For the first time in what felt like forever, Naomi allowed herself to just be, without the weight of her past constantly hanging over her. She was making new memories, and those memories were her own. Later in the evening, as the party began to wind down, Naomi found herself sitting in a quiet corner, taking in the moment. James had stayed by her side, as always, but he gave her space to enjoy herself. It was one of those rare moments where Naomi felt completely at ease, the noise of the world fading into the background. You're doing well, James said, sitting beside her and looking out over the party. I think this is the most relaxed I've seen you in a while. Naomi smiled at him, her heart full. I didn't realize how much I needed this, she admitted. I've spent so much time focusing on everything I've lost, everything I've been afraid of, that I forgot what it felt like to just be happy. James reached over and took her hand, his eyes soft with understanding. You've earned this, Naomi. You fought for it. Naomi squeezed his hand, a feeling of gratitude sweeping over her. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. Thank you, James, for being here, for believing in me. He smiled, the warmth in his eyes reflecting the love and trust they had built together. I'm not going anywhere, he said simply. Naomi leaned back in her chair, looking around at the people she had just met, at the life she had begun to piece together. For the first time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Her past had shaped her, but it didn't define her anymore. The future was open before her, full of possibilities. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. She was ready for whatever came her way. She had faced the darkness, and now she could embrace the light. She wasn't afraid anymore. Naomi was free, and she would never let anyone take that away from her. In this captivating black story, Naomi's journey of overcoming the dark shadows of her past leads her to a new life, filled with strength, resilience, and the hope of a fresh start. After escaping a controlling relationship and seeking refuge in a safe space, Naomi slowly rebuilds her life. From her days at the bookstore to her moments of self-discovery, this black story explores the struggles of breaking free from fear and learning to trust again. As Naomi faces unexpected encounters with those from her past, including the threatening presence of Robert, she learns that her true power lies not in running, but in standing her ground. This black story beautifully shows the complexity of human relationships, the strength it takes to face one's fears, and the courage to embrace a future unburdened by the past. Through Naomi's evolving journey, she realizes that freedom is more than just physical escape. It's a mental and emotional liberation. With the unwavering support of James, Naomi's newfound hope grows, and she steps into a future where she is in control of her destiny. This black story captures the raw emotions of finding inner peace and the power of resilience, reminding us all that no matter how heavy the past may be, the future is still ours to shape.